Good evening, everyone. This is another episode of the Muni Poly Matters podcast. I'm very pleased tonight to welcome actually a personal friend of mine, Ameek Singh. He is running in Brampton for city and regional councillor in wards 3 and 4. And Ameek, how are you doing tonight, man?
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Alan. It's always a pleasure to speak with you. I'm doing okay. Coming off a night shift. My bearings are a little different. It's 7 p.m. Local time here, so it's been a whirlwind. I added, as you mentioned, in the whirlwind of life, the election as well. So it's a nice mix, if you will. It's a nice mix of things.
Yeah, so just to let the listeners and the viewers know out there, I met Ameek through, we both have frequently been on radio for specifically Saga 960. Ameek actually hosted his own show for a couple of years, I think.
Yeah,
and
it's off the air right now just because I'm running, but hopefully it comes back again. The show's name was Big Talk, but yes, Alan, yeah, we definitely mingled through Saga 960. There's a lot of people that in my life that have been attributed to that radio station, I have to say.
Yeah, it was a nice little panel discussion that we've always had. A lot about local issues in Brampton, in Peel, and sometimes just nationally and beyond. And so I don't think I've ever had a long, detailed conversation. I know you're in the healthcare sector, but I guess maybe I just go into a bit of early background about yourself.
Sure.
What did you grow up in Brampton, born and raised, and maybe just tell the people about a little bit about yourself.
Yep, definitely grew up in Brampton. I was definitely someone that looked to this country, if you will, just like a lot of first generation immigrants, as a new start, if you will. I came in the country when I was in grade 1. I didn't have any family members here or extended relatives or friends, so we actually ended up staying in a local Gurdwara for a month before we found our first basement. That was Dixie Gurdwara, Ontario Culture of the Bar, Ontario Dixie. So every time I drive past it, yes, it's not in Brampton per se, but I think Mississauga, Brampton kind of mishmash like that. It's a fond memory. If you ever go by that intersection, you'll see a small house. It's a very dated small house next to the larger building. That small house, there's a room there that our family stayed there for about a month and a half before we got our bearings in this country, and we got our first basement. And ever since then, I've been living in Brampton. Fern Forest was my first school that I went to here, and being all prim and proper as we were. We got our binders. I was very excited to start school, and was very excited to see that, Brampton was full of South Asian individuals, full of different cultures, Asian individuals. We definitely had a large Jamaican presence. We just definitely had a large African presence. So I feel like I was traveling the world going into the classroom, and that sentiment I still carry with me to this day. That this is a very interesting microcosm of a place where different cultures from the world have collided, and they've made something really beautiful. And in order to benefit from that, preserve that, we made friendships and we got to know one another, and the experiences that we had were shared. There were commonalities there, and I think those shared commonalities came from the frustrations that we had with our parents, with the challenges of the social norms of the time, and financial stressors. Everyone had a different perspective of how they were dealing with it and coping with it, and those sort of things you don't think that much as a kid would impact you, but certain memories that you have do dictate how you perceive life as you grow up as an adult, right? Not having yearning to be part of an after school program, but knowing that your parents want you back home because they're working double shifts. You have the interest in programs or going after school. Like I was on the soccer team in middle school and in high school, but not having your parents show up at practice just because, again, they're working multiple jobs, and having the potential to go and join rec centers and programming to, develop your skills. But again, not having the opportunity to, or the parents saying, well, this is sports, you're not going to become a soccer player, so let's focus more on the academic side of things. And you go through this lens of life, seeing how direction and opportunity provide the outcome. And sure enough, I actually did pursue more of the academic side of things and ended up going into nursing. My mom's a nurse. I was making my decision in 2008. It was a very interesting time for a lot of people that were in the business side of things were in career change mode in that time. And a lot of accountants, a lot of business majors were having a hard time finding a job. So, seeing the scarcity of resources and the gargantuan efforts, first generation parents put on their kids, I ended up picking nursing because, one, I knew I had a job after a certain amount of time, and I volunteered so much in the hospital in Brampton Civic growing up as a kid. Didn't have much of a social life, so of course I had to go to Civic as a volunteer. And we found a same eclectic group of individuals that were aspiring to either going to medicine or nursing or radiation tech. There were a bunch of them, and even business majors, just to work on their soft skills. We shared the same sort of norms, and I went to Trent University for nursing in Peterborough. I feel like that's when I finally arrived in Canada in that sense, because yes, there were definitely some Caucasians in Brampton, Mississauga growing up, but those numbers were dwindling by the mile, if you will. So Peterborough was the first time. I think I was the only man with a turban in campus from 2011 to 15. The only man on campus with a turban, and middle out alone, the only turban man in a nursing program. Majority of the people there came from the Ottawa Valley region, and I got exposed again to a different way of doing things, and understanding the challenges of rural Ontario as well as urban Ontario. So it shaped who I am as a person. Working in a very intimate setting as healthcare, you get to appreciate and see things from all facets of life, right? It's the equal, well, up until this point, it is the equalizer that we all have. When we seek healthcare, despite of our socioeconomic status, despite our resources available to us, for majority of the care that's delivered, it's the same, right? And that is something that we hold near and dear in this country. And after coming back from university, always had an inkling for interest in government. I went, the seeds were planted early on. There were some special programs in schools, and we had the option. Peel District School Board every year used to host a get together with students that were involved in local government. I was the treasurer in my middle school. I didn't get involved in politics in high school because I chose the sports route and had different ideas at the time. But I included myself in government because I felt there was a need to understand how the world works, and taking that all in was very helpful. It was a way to relate with the world that I didn't have the opportunity to do so when I was in India as a child. That for sure enough, I was quite young. But Alan, you come across these norms in life wherever your the country where your parents come from, that you can engage in public debate and discourse as openly as you can in Canada. So that was like a breath of oxygen that kind of came my way. And I latched onto it. We, as I mentioned, had yearly meetings at the head office in Peel District School Board, and all the involved government, local government people were were called to discuss challenges of the world, and that was very profound for me. Yes, we had NGOs to discuss about what does globalization mean, what does urbanization mean. And as a 12-year-old kid, you're listening to these presentations, you're listening to these NGOs come in, and you have a profound sense of responsibility that's kind of placed on your shoulder, like your generation has to fix climate change, your generation has to fix how we interact with the world, the way businesses are done, how do we make things more fair. And you are interacting with these big ideas, but the implementation of it in your own local life, you see a contradiction. The contradiction that you see is there are a lot of resources available, but they're designed for someone in privilege in mind, someone that has the capacity to take a day off from work in mind, or they have the ability to transport themselves from point A to point B in time. Those barriers were not thought of in those years. Now that's the hot topic, right? Like, how can we make things virtual? How can we make things automated? How can we make things 24/7? Is there a way to do all of this? Is there a phone line? Like, those things in the early 2000s, that level of planning was not there. Transit was horrible, to say the least. Now I think the generation that's come out of that is involved in government in some capacity. And of course, people are moving towards a more urbanized or connected world, if you will. And they're seeing that having a good transit system, having a good school system, a good healthcare system has a lot of impacts in how communities work.
Yeah. That's so. Thank you very much for sharing that, Ameek. That's a lot of information, and I can see why you used to host your own radio show, because you definitely have a lot of thoughts and ideas about how things should work, or how the way the world is. I guess, like, I want to ask, like, because you decided to go into nursing because your mom was a nurse as well, so there's that background. And, like, was there a lot of interconnectivity between the healthcare sector and all these other issues you saw around your community, and how they all relate to each other? Because, like, everybody, healthcare, everybody uses it to varying degrees, right?
Yeah.
And there's, like, but there's also, like, other issues, like you mentioned, transportation and affordable housing. Like, those are sort of externalities that, in a way, like, if you can live in a comfortable place, and if you are able to get from point A to point B reasonably, like, that still affects your health overall. Like,
right.
So, like, was there a lot of, like, interconnectivity in your
field
of work?
Was.
Yeah.
And I'll touch on it. Thank you for that question. And in the first lecture I had in nursing school was, what is wellness? What is health? And the definition of that was looked through the through the lens of social determinants of health. And I'm like, what is this? Social determinants of health. Housing is a healthcare issue. Transit is a healthcare issue. Connectivity is a healthcare issue. Access is a healthcare issue. And it's like all the light bulbs went off in my head. And I just didn't have the words to put it in that context. But all of these social challenges and social programming, if they're looked through the social determinants of health, you have a much better outcome of, or outlook, and a measure of how a community is functioning, how the community is doing. And nursing kind of encompasses all of their assessments through that. And from an academic lens, this is what we study. We lean on our sociology partners, we lean on our anthropology partners, we lean on our business partners to make these astute decisions and determinations of behavior change. How do we get individuals to pick a healthier lifestyle? What are some of the stressors? How do they manage the stressors? We look at these things in nursing school and in our profession and in medicine as a general to understand the outcome that we're looking for. Let's say it's less strokes. Let's say it's less people that have type 2 diabetes. How do we get there? Well, we look at, what are they eating? What do they have access to? Is this an income challenge? Is there a subsidy that we could have? Some days when you're in a rush, you're not eating breakfast, and when did those habits get planted? They're in your early days in school, or how you deal with life. What's your connection with food? And we go through these questions and scenarios and discuss them. I look at literature and find out the lived experience. That's a general term to describe how an individual's life journey is going and the stressors that are added on. And that same lens, Alan, is used in government, right? In a different variable, all the programs look at the same measures. How many people are coming? How many people are getting served? Does this program or intended subsidy actually reach the people it's reaching? Did it have the intended effect? And if it does, then the programs get renewed. If it's not there, then we go back to the drawing board and see, okay, how can we change this to make things work? If government's listening and government's paying attention, I felt that sort of lens is very helpful in making local government decisions, provincial government decisions, and federal government decisions. So when I came back from nursing school to Brampton, I had a wealth of knowledge and assessment skills that I've wanted to implement in my community. As very gung ho about it. I'll share my transcript with you. Some of my marks aren't that good, but the ones that I'm really proud of to this day is the nursing leadership course that I took in third year, and it discussed exactly how nurses can bring policy change. And I never thought that nurses and policy that's a thing. But then a light bulb went up my head. It's like, this is my calling. I paid attention to that class like nobody's business, showed up to every lecture, extra credit. And I had not felt that way about school since I first came from India to Canada, because that spark was in me. Like, I want to take all of this in. Like you're very happy to take all of this information, and nursing and medicine and university in general. You're at a peak of life where it's the stressors of getting into school, the stressors of being a young adult, living up by yourself, navigating the world, kind of impose on you in a way where learning isn't the best, as opposed to when you know who you are in your later adult years. You're not really questioning the world's definition of you. You've kind of formed your own opinion. And you go out there and try to do the best. And that's the same sort of skill set that I kind of brought back here, got involved in healthcare advocacy, saw the challenges that, we learn in school, very prevalent in Brampton, very prevalent in Peel region. Always had an inkling to go into public health, eventually ended up going into public health in the pandemic. And all the ideas that I had as a nurse, I'm like, one day I will try to implement this in some formal capacity. And I found that public health was the way to kind of do it. And engaging with government was the way to kind of do it. Not in 100 years, I would have thought I would have a radio show and meet yourself. That was not on, as a child or as a kid, when you grow up, like, what do I want to do when I grow up? The radio show was not on the agenda, but somehow we got here, and engaging the public was a very important sentiment that I think democracies all across the world are having challenges with, and we need to look at our health and health of our democracy in a very objective way as well, and see, like, why is there such disengagement? And local issues do matter because they lead up to the engagement of the public. And on a local level, if government is not effective, what's the expectation that the constituents or the residents will have with their federal or provincial government? Because the bad taste in their mouth with their local politicians and officials, right? So it starts at home. Everything starts at home. So that's a sentiment I carry forward, and I've tried to implement that in my life as best I can.
Yeah. Well, so thank you again for that answer. So, so obviously public health is a very strong, passionate area that you want to do more in.
Yeah.
And I guess that would sort of segue into like the question of why you're running, I guess, because, public health is a regional PO jurisdiction.
Yeah.
Running for regional councillor would make a lot of sense.
Yeah.
I just want to let our listeners and viewers know where you are actually running and sort of explain
Sure.
how the city council is structured in Brampton. So Ameek is running in wards 3 and 4 in Brampton. So I will post a map along with this interview later. But it's essentially from Queen Street to the north, and I'm including both wards, all the way to the border with Mississauga in the south, and then from the west to Mississauga Road, and then to, I think, is Dixie Road in the east.
Yep.
And so I know certain neighborhoods around the city, like Peel Village is in your ward.
Yeah. County Court, Peel
County
Village.
Court, Gage Park is in your ward. Actually,
Park.
technically speaking, City Hall Brampton City Hall
Yeah.
is in your ward.
Yeah.
And if people out there have been paying attention to Brampton City Hall or decide to Google Brampton City Hall, you might have seen a lot of news that have been emerging these last few months.
Yeah.
I don't even know where to begin, and like, you can answer the best way as possible, because it
Yeah.
just seems like I've been paying attention to Brampton municipal politics since I think around 2014.
Okay.
It seems that the main concern or thing that people wish for is just some unity around council instead of all
Yeah.
this division. We saw
Yeah.
division from the time of Linda Jeffrey. And then when
Yes.
Patrick Brown became mayor, everybody thought, oh, we're going to get a more
Cohesive.
cohesive council. And it seemed like for the first couple of years, it was working that way. But it seems that recent events pertaining to allegations of Mayor Brown misusing city staff for his own political purposes, to certain councillors being embroiled in conflict of interest scandals, to
Yeah.
Mayor Brown himself seeking for a few months the federal conservative leadership race, and now boiling down to another division yet again on council over, first of all, over Mr. Brown putting in alleged cronies in the city administration to
Yeah.
the vacancy on Ward 7 and 8, because MPP Charmaine Williams was elected to the legislature. So all of that, like, I guess the way I
It's-
ask this question is, why would you want to get into this?
Yeah,
Like,
good
what are
question.
you doing, man?
No, thank you. You know what? You're right. It is definitely a hard time to ask yourself, why would you want to run for office? And my answer to that is because Brampton's home. Brampton is a place where I've grown up for the majority of my life. It's where I've doubled down and seek my own fortunes and life here. This is something of a very interesting city because it grew with me. The size of the city grew with me. The population of the city grew with me. And it will age as I age, right? Through my life experience, I've only seen growth in Brampton. I've only seen bottlenecks in Brampton. And you're right to say, you started paying attention to Mayor Jeffrey's term. Mayor Jeffrey's term was the first time where I personally felt that there is cohesiveness in terms of the top leadership and the direction that the city was going at that time. Of course, the power vacuum that Elaine Moore brought to that council was not good for Brampton, and also the challenges of engaging provincial and federal governments at the time, and the way we were going about it was not the best way to do. We were working on old, small town politics when we were preparing to become a larger city as the days were going on. And the lack of acknowledgement of that in our planning, in our asks from government, has led to the bottlenecks that we're experiencing right now. And the reason I'm running is because I want to see a Brampton, I want to see my home in a much better place than I had. And there's certain charms that I had growing up that I don't see kids have access to right now. I don't see young families and new immigrants have access to right now. If I were to land in Canada now and try to think Brampton's home, if I would go to that same Gurdwara now and say, hey, is it possible that I could get a room for a month? They would shake their head and say no. The challenges are because the number of people that are coming to Brampton as immigration and climate change is making things harder on a macro level. You're going to see climate migration happen, and that's, for the most part, that's what's happening. And being so close to the airport, Brampton's going to welcome a lot of communities, not just South Asian ones. We're going to get people from all over the world and different walks of life. And, when young families want to make Brampton home, I want them to have that same experience that I had as a kid going to my first classroom, although it might be in a portable at the time. And I was very confused. Why are we sitting outside when there's a building right there? And that's a concept that a lot of families ask now to this day and age. Why are they portable still in Brampton? Why aren't we planning for bigger schools and a bigger, larger footprint? And those are all regional decisions. Those are all municipal decisions, and they have an impact on someone's life. They have an impact on someone's understanding of who they are as a person. You want to show that we're a welcoming city by our design, and we aren't doing that right now. That's why I'm running, to make sure that the design of the city for its current plan and its future plan, that Mayor Jeffrey's term that I saw, the Vision 2040. I forget the person's name, but his first name is Peter. A man from Vancouver came out here, and it was commissioned by the city to design the city in a much connected way, much more cohesive way, and the wonders that Vancouver has experienced because of the city planner that was called on. I wanted to seek the same benefits for Brampton because of the large, bustling potential of the city. The amount of authors, artists, entrepreneurs, healthcare leaders, everybody from local to federal politics that have touched Brampton in some capacity and made their name is amazing. And we want to keep that sort of infrastructure in place for future generations, because a lot of the world's problems will be solved right here in Brampton. We talk about big world politics. In what part of the world would you see people that come from countries that have conflicts with one another, but they're neighbors and they're getting along just fine, and they actually know one another much better than the country's diplomatic affairs would allow them to know? And that is beautiful. That's something we want to preserve and show the world that, hey, at the end of the day, we can coexist in a loving, peaceful environment and grow up to our full potential. That's something that I don't take for granted. And in the times that we are in today, that's a challenge. That's a challenge to see that level of unity in place. We're just past, we're in the month of August now. We saw so many cultures having their flag raisings at City Hall. So many cultures have their festivals here, and people from all walks of life. One of the reasons I moved from east of Brampton to downtown Brampton was to experience the things that I was kind of missing out as a kid. Whether it's the farmers market, whether it's the Real Rose Theater and the accessibility to culture and the arts here. Or just having those wonderful parks that old Brampton's so famous for, and parts of Mississauga and Toronto are famous for. We don't see those planning measures placed in the new communities that are coming up, right? We don't see those large, beautiful trees and the tree canopies and the nice long places where people want to take leisurely walks. And you see the average person that lives in downtown Brampton, they walk out a lot, even if they have cars, because it's so beautiful outside. The air is so fresh. That's something that we want to preserve in the generations to come, and how we plan our community as we're going to see growth. Where are we going to find these green spaces? Where are we going to find recreation centers that hold all of these beautiful sports programming, these social programmings, and that sense of community that we're missing for a large chunk of time because of the real estate market and the challenges that came with that. That's another challenge that the city has to face, is how do we bring housing in a dignified manner to the city? Do we implement the secondary units, and now even the granny units, if you will, if your lot's big enough? How do we do that in a dignified way? Those are some of the ingenuities that council has to work with the city's residents to come up with a nuanced approach where we have balanced avenues. So the kid that is in the basement apartment, the kid that is going to be in the granny suite, has the same experience. The equalizers of life, whether it's your school, whether it's your healthcare access, whether it's transit or your local facilities, that they feel welcome in those spaces. And there's no barrier in participation. I think that's the biggest challenge that we have right now, is there's barriers to participation in our locally funded spaces. And to erase those barriers is to have better policy in place, and a policy that has their perspectives ingrained in how things are formed. So, as new immigrants move in Brampton, and old residents have lived here for a long time, their quality of life is the same. They don't feel impacted by the challenges of the world, because their government's listening to them and is hearing their concerns and implementing the change that's needed. So that's why I'm running.
Okay. So you mentioned the Brampton 2040 vision, and you and I have seen I guess, pictures or artistic renditions of the vision going forward. They're very impressive. It's very reminiscent of Singapore in Brampton,
Yeah.
if you can believe it.
Yeah.
I guess like my next question would be like, are you seeing progress on the current council moving along some of those ideas in 2040? And like in terms of finances, how is the city going to afford like bringing about this vision to life? Because from what I've heard, Mayor Brown has touted that he's kept property taxes frozen
Yeah.
in the last 4 years during his time in office. And yet, we kind of need money in order to fund the programs for, basic services, if not even new services. It seems
Yeah.
that like, is that a responsible thing to do? Like, I guess my question would be like, how are you on like revenue tools or any sort of thing like that? Like, is it like, can cities like Brampton sustain themselves going forward with just property tax, or do they need other ways to raise money?
That's a great question. And Alan, just like you and I are having this conversation about, finances, I'm sure that's what the council needs to do in this next upcoming term, is talk about finances as a conversation, not as a tax, not as coming out, you did this and I did that, and I'm standing for this and you're standing for that. Because once we get in arguments, you're not going to get consensus. And if you don't get consensus, you don't get action, right? And right now we have a 5-5 split in council, and that has its own challenges. And if the same variables are there in the next term, we're going to be having to make tough decisions, and there's going to be indecisiveness in those tough decisions. This is the third time Brampton's been offered an LRT, and we don't have an LRT completed. You talk about vision of 2040. The vision is still there, but the implementation is not. And the reason why it's not there is because we're not having a realistic approach in how conversations are happening in the city. The reason why the zero tax dollar increase wasn't asked for residents is because they're not seeing services reflect the high tax bills that were currently in place. They're not seeing the bottlenecks being addressed. So they ask themselves, why am I paying so many taxes? My bottlenecks are going to be the same, because a lot of Bramptonians have accepted the fact or begrudgingly decided that this is just how things are. And that's not a standard that I want to hold council to. And residents in the city will not hold me accountable to that standard either. As a change maker that's looked at the challenges all levels of government has parlayed with them in different roles, I can assure you that all levels of government, provincially and federally, are looking to plan Canada in a much more cohesive way. It's now Brampton's benefit that if a council's there to kind of put their visions in line with the federal government's policies and the provincial government's policies, lo and behold, a lot of the bottlenecks that we're talking about, other communities are facing them as well. So if a systemic level change is coming in a country's design and resource allocation, why are we not putting our asks forward so we can see the benefits of the change? The resources that property taxes do include, yes, we cannot keep going back to the residential taxpayer again and again and again. But sometimes when there are no other options in the current revenue streams of the city, we have to go back to the drawing board and say, listen, residents of Brampton, these are the bottlenecks you've experienced. A lot of people are actually leaving Brampton because they don't see it as a community that will facilitate growth, and it's getting too expensive on top of inflation. Residents of Brampton have always stepped up when bottlenecks are perceived to be addressed. Brampton Civic comes to mind. The amount of car washes I attended and participated in just without being asked, because we're raising funds for civics building, the amount of engagement the business community had here, those things came from the ask of bottlenecks being addressed. And there was jubilation in the city that we're finally getting a new hospital. Mind you, that was way back when. And the day the lights went on in Civic, it was full to the brim, which we knew it was going to be. So it's not toying with people's aspirations and hopes and giving them a realistic plan. If we're able to offer a solution to the bottlenecks and the cost is associated with that to the taxpayer, much like the healthcare levy that's on the tax bill right now for the expansion of Peel Memorial, the taxpayer for the large part is happy with it. They're not upset with it. It's just the misallocation of funds and not getting along in council and not making good decisions. And you turn around and you ask yourself, well, I elected a government 10 years ago or 8 years ago for some of these councillors, or some of these councillors even larger time on council. And you ask them, what is your legacy for the city? What have you accomplished other than, renaming parks and, other than going out there and just glad-handing people? What is the systemic change that we're trying to implement? Educational institutions are knocking at Brampton's door. Industry is knocking at Brampton's door, and they're asking, look, we like your city. You're on the innovation corridor. We want to build the city up. We'll actually put our capital in the city, but please work with us. And council's too busy bickering with each other to actually make decisive decisions. So the revenue will be there. The costs associated will be transparent to the taxpayer. Any fundamental change in design language for the city and the vision implementation, 2040 is now kicked to 2050. And this is a sign of there's not actions on any of the items. Engaging the residents and saying, hey, this is the change that we sought out based on the evidence that was needed. How would you like this change to happen? Right? Like, I have the benefit of walking down the street on a weekend and experiencing live music, parks, a lot of city programming that other parts of Brampton don't have access to. Wards 3 and 4 is very engaged with local government because City Hall is literally in our ward. And they have had benefits of that. I want those same benefits to continue, not just for this ward, but we have a city approach that we look outside of our ward boundaries, we connect as a council, and then look outside of Brampton and look at what Mississauga is doing and the good practices and best practices that municipality has had. Look at the growth that Caledon is planning for, and the little space that we do have left. How do we maintain a good quality of life with growth? That's going to be the biggest question that residents are going to ask for. And how do we connect people to one another? The reason why the congestion has gone up is the number of cars in the city has gone up. The reason number of cars have gone up because there wasn't 24/7 access to transit, and shift workers and the employment zone areas in the city and outside of the city where new residents are going to work aren't really accounted for in our transit route. Somebody that sat on transit committee for the last 4 years, I had an honest conversation with Brampton Transit and asked them, hey, why is it that we're stopping educational lines going to York University? A lot of people from Brampton go there. Why are we stopping planning with the employers that are part of the shift work and the logistics industry here? And the answers came back as, yeah, that's a great point. Let's work on that. And yes, we have the York line that started up again, and the pandemic did pause a lot of things. But Brampton Transit, much like every other municipality, is having challenges with fuel. The cost of fuel's gone up, and there are variables that are in our control and the variables that aren't in our control, right? But to the local person that's waiting on the bus stop, those things aren't apparent. What's apparent if the bus is going to come on time and take them to where they want to go. So that's the endpoint service delivery. That's the metric that I'm holding myself accountable to if I'm elected in government. What is the innovation and service delivery look like from an end user perspective? And from the macro perspective, how do we make this easier for the bureaucrats to advocate for a much larger project? We're supposed to get a third facility the federal government has pushed for in Brampton, a storage facility for transit. It never got built. We were supposed to have a pilot that started the electrification of Fergus, and the first pilot project has taken off. But working alongside with the federal government, if we are going towards a much more electrified, densified way of doing public transit, planning for that would also require the city to kind of look at, okay, what is the cost of changing all of our network into electric, right? And I'm not seeing those conversations happen. And like I said, there is a huge systemic change in how government's deciding to plan for the future, and they're having these conversations openly. Whether it's health transfers, whether it's the way taxation is done, whether it's how involved the power will be between municipal and provincial. All of these things are on the table. In a time like this, if we don't have a united council and a council that has a vision that they are kind of all embodying to accomplish, how are you going to see change? You're not going to see the change that we want to see in Brampton if we want to be a world-class city. And like you said, the Singapore vision that you have for Brampton that is outlined in the schematics, we have to enact a lot of good leadership in order for that to happen, or some semblance of that idea needs to be preserved in our duties every day, in the motions that we pass, in the discussions that we have. I'll have 4 years of AMO meetings and FCM meetings. And if I'm, that's our Super Bowl, and it's AMO's happening in Ottawa right now. Sadly, I'm not there because, nursing capacity challenges and my ER is full and I have to show up to work. So
I just want to say, I love how you sound, you're so gung ho and excited about going to an AMO meeting. For those of you who don't know, AMO stands for Association of Municipalities of Ontario. It's the big umbrella group that represents all the 444 municipalities in Ontario, and they just concluded, as of this recording, their annual general meeting in Ottawa. And yeah, I saw you tweet about it. You were like, yes, Team Brampton is there. We're getting represented. It was very interesting. I guess like my last question, or sort of second last question, you mentioned about Brampton City Council. I think overall, like the first thing they got to do is start actually working together again. It seems like we're rehashing that, but they got to work together again. The province recently said that they plan to introduce something called a strong mayor powers. This is going to be a pilot project for Toronto and Ottawa first. But Premier Ford has said that he plans to introduce these for all large cities in Ontario, including Brampton. So if the mayor has the power to hire, I guess, the city manager and the city planner, which I think was one of the issues specific to Brampton that was a problem in the first place. How much of a factor of a collegial council would it be if the mayor can just if the mayor has more powers to implement his or her own agenda, or choose city hall administrative staff, that sort of thing? Like, how does that affect your role as a councillor if you get elected?
So that's a really wonderful question, and thank you for asking me that question. I think politics, much like city council, is a team sport, right? And every sport, every team has a captain, right? Everybody has their role on the team. Somebody's playing defense, somebody's playing offense, somebody's playing midfield or point guard. Somebody's job is to make sure you get the points or get the goals in. Somebody's job is to make sure home court advantage is best capitalized on, or your defense is there to deny the incoming forces their chances of succeeding. If you don't have a strong congruency as a team and the vision is not united, you're going to have disjointment, right? You're not going to have cohesion. If the vision that council adopts is unanimous and it's in line with what the residents want, and it's feedback driven and it's community driven, it doesn't matter if the mayor has that power, because if that power is given with this council's united agenda behind it, we're all going to get the points. End of the day, when the game is said and done, there's somebody that's going to win the game and lose the game. And I want to be on the winning side of the game, right? Doesn't mean that I have to shoot all the shots myself. Maybe the person responsible for that is going to be the mayor, and the people of Brampton have to decide who that person is going to be. And more importantly, this ruling from the provincial government has come out because of the inaction in disjointed local government councils, where we've gone years and years without planning of big infrastructure pieces. You talk about Toronto, the Gardner is a nightmare, and it's been a nightmare for the city for how many years? But only Torontonians are impacted by it. Bramptonians are impacted by it. Logistics is impacted by it. And now they've literally pushed the buck as far as they could go, and they started the emergency repairs that they need to make sure that that key piece of infrastructure remains intact. It's not even growing it or working with the future role of the Gardner or expanding it or thinking of other arteries into the city. It's just to maintain the infrastructure. The cost is so much. And it's because of inaction in government, because nobody wanted to make a bold move and say, listen, this is crumbling infrastructure. It's not serving the city. We need to move forward with a vision. And the cost of changing that, let's say in the 90s and the early 2000s, would be much cheaper than it is right now. But again, the decision of council was not made. And that's why the price of change keeps going up as inflation rises, and the frustration of the people also keeps going up because they're not seeing change. So if there's a united council with a vision that they're all going to work on, you don't have challenges with the mayor's powers, because we need to make some decisions. And sometimes when there is a tough call to make, you want to give somebody in council that extra bit of leverage and say, you know what, we need to make a decision. We're all in agreement that change needs to happen. Let's push for this thing. And council will allow for things to move more amicably, and it's palatable to the residents as well, because they're seeing change come about in their lifetime, right? I was thinking about Vision 2040 and the vision that the city wants to come across as. We've declared as a city a climate crisis. We've declared a housing crisis. We've declared a healthcare emergency. Those are big things. What actions have we taken as a council to address those big ticket things? That warning sign that we keep waving, what actions have we actually taken to address those things? We haven't taken any solid actions other than advocating for funding. Yes, healthcare, because we declared a crisis, we got 250 beds, but we know we're 500 short still, right? Mayor Jeffrey's term negotiated 500 beds for us at that time. The implementation of it now is 250. So it only makes sense to start planning for that third hospital at the same time that we're planning for phase 2. Councillor is, going to the press about hiring an architectural firm to design the expansion. They still haven't picked and submitted their plans. So there's ways of looking, and I see your eyes pop like, why did he say that? Because it's the truth. And these are some uncomfortable facts that we have to discuss as a city and work with our hospital partners to make sure that the city's urgency is understood by all stakeholders, because I am going to be seeking elected office, but there's stakeholders in the city that aren't elected, but they also have a huge impact. The Board of Trade's decisions are going to have a huge impact. Osler's board is going to have a huge impact. Ontario Health's is going to have a huge impact. Brampton Transit is going to have a huge impact. The real estate board here is going to have a huge impact. How builders envision Brampton growing, if it's in line with our vision as a city, they will have sway as well. So this is what I mean by the Team Brampton approach. We're going to face a lot of different teams that might be in our government league, or it might be an international league, or it might be in the realm of real estate. But if the team is doing its job cohesively, we have a game plan in place, we have a good coach, which are the bureaucrats that guide us the way in how we need to do decisions, and they have the knowledge, skill set, and the curated understanding of how government works, and they advise us the way we need to be advised and how we move forward. And we do our own independent research in how policies that we enact have impacted communities that are thinking of implementing the same policies. If all of this is not studied and understood before we go, to the chambers and council and have debate, we're going to have a bad government. But if we all do our job, go to work, talk to one another, share ideas, sit at a round table with the understanding of respect, with the understanding of agency for Brampton and advocacy for Brampton, if all of that is kept in mind, you have a much more cohesive council. And lo and behold, the frowns on Bramptonians' faces turn into smiles. And you ask yourself, how did that happen? Because we were listening to people. We were actually enacting the changes that, council was talking about. And people were talking about when I go door knocking. And you know this yourself, every election, the biggest frustration people have in government is, I'm paying my taxes, this is not working, that's not working, you promised me this, it wasn't carried through, you promised me this wasn't carried through. So compromises that council will make, they have to answer for as well. But hopefully they're good decisions that come out of this term, and we don't have the problems of old City Hall coming into new City Hall. What I mean by that is, there's some power brokers in the city that are still dictating terms outside of council. And they even tried to come within council. And unfortunately, people that were appointing them there were doing it in a very nonchalant way that was not really apropos with the current legislation, right? And if we are allowing old power brokers to still dictate terms for the city that they don't have a vested interest in, then we're allowing the city of Brampton not really having the vision enacted for the current residents that live here. And that is the biggest frustration that we have as a municipality. I think we look to our sister city, Mississauga, and the great work they've done. It's a landmark, and it's a way of kind of building good practices within our own municipality. It's not that far away. 410 and 403 collide like right there and then. You can go to Mississauga's chambers and talk to their staff and ask what are some good practices that we can implement here in Brampton. They have businesses that have invested in Mississauga. Why is that? Why can't Brampton attract the similar type of businesses or different ingenuities that we can have here? Rogers is going to have a larger footprint in Brampton. Granted, they're a big perception right now in the media sphere and public sphere is not that healthy, but it allows for a conversation to happen, which is fiber optic cable all across Brampton, all across Peel region. If Caledon is requesting, and Mayor Thompson has been very gung-ho about this during his term and his final days in power, he's pushing for fiber optic all across Caledon. Well, if they understand the challenges of not having access to high-speed internet, and Brampton's going to be a cyber catalyst champion, it's going to be cybersecurity hub. We're going to have institutions coming here educationally. The bandwidth of the city has to go up all across the city, right? So it's not just the new subdivisions that need fiber optic. It's a common sense approach to make sure that the entirety of the municipality of Brampton has fiber optic.
I seem to have lost Ameek there for a second. Let me see. Sorry about this, folks. He's just frozen there, and I'm not sure why. Let me see. I might have to reestablish my connection here. Just give me one moment, please. Very much. Okay. Oh, are we back? Oh, are you back?
Yeah, sorry, I don't know what happened there.
I don't know either. I just stopped for a second, but it looks like you're okay. So yeah, sorry about that, Ameek. Okay,
That's okay.
that was the first time that happened.
Yeah.
So okay, maybe we should wrap this up.
Sure.
And I guess so. Like, I'll just make one final personal point because I've known you for personally for a couple of years now.
Yeah.
You're obviously very passionate about the issues you care about,
Yeah.
and that might rub some people the wrong way. I'm pretty sure that would. But
Oh yeah.
But I'm very clear about this. Is that I don't think anyone out there dislikes you, and I think that would be a help. That's a great asset to have because you seem to get along with just everyone, no matter what side they're on. And I think that would be a great asset should you become the regional councillor in Brampton. So Ameek, as this campaign begins around, I guess, after Labor Day or even after August 19th, how can people get in touch with you if they want to volunteer or just ask you a question?
Thank you so much for that question. Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter, and it's at Ameek Singh 434. You could also call or text me. The number is 647-249-0634. Again, that's 647-249-0634. And in addition to that, come to the local events. I will definitely have more campaign stops. If you live in wards 3 and 4, come talk to me as I knock on your door, or meet you in parks, or meet you outside grocery stores and businesses that we all frequent. That's basically it. Is just have a conversation with me. You can reach me online. You can reach me in person. I am very quick to respond on phone. If I'm working a shift, yes, there's still the healthcare crisis looming. I'm definitely still going to be working through it because we're extremely short staffed, and I have skill sets that the public needs as well. So it's going to be a very challenging time, and we will definitely have conversations in all mediums, online and offline. And more importantly, I want people to vote this election. I don't care how they vote, just vote this election, because that is the biggest driver of change, and be engaged with your city. We have a lovely office of the Community Safety Wellbeing Plan that I'm very passionate about. That has heard your concerns, and I think it's one of the only forums at a regional level and at a city level that the city's actually got out and talked to residents in different wards and understood their concerns and consolidated data and the asks that the city would like to see as a whole, the residents would like to see as a whole implemented, with fire, police, EMS in mind, and city planning as in mind as well. So it's those sort of forums that I want to galvanize, give more capital towards, so we continue to have engaged dialogues in a forum where, you know, the challenges of not having enough policies for rooming houses, the challenges for not having enough policies for transit, speeding being the biggest conversation piece I'm hearing. And why don't we have those radar cameras in my neighborhood? Why don't we have those traffic calming measures in our neighborhoods? Why don't we have speed bumps? And those are things that other municipalities have. And I don't want to hear the conversation of snow clearing will be hard, because if it's currently in plazas and snow still gets plowed, we can definitely do it in a city-wide level as well. Parking being a challenge. All of these things that people are festering with frustration, congestion being a challenge, they need answers. And the way to get answers is to understand their frustration. Go to the people that have the specialized skill set, say, hey, city planners, what can we do here to alleviate some of these pressures? Go back to the residents, engage them. These are options A, B, and C. Which one would you like to have implemented? And then implement it. It's a very simple process. That's how government should be. And I hope to achieve that level of standard for local government as we engage our residents and different levels of government as well. So we arm ourselves with the knowledge and perspectives of Brampton residents in every single meeting we have in an official capacity.
Well, thank you very much, Ameek. I really appreciate you sitting down with me to discuss about your candidacy and what sort of things you want to bring forward to your community. And so thank you very much. And this is the Muni Policy Matters podcast. I'm Alan, and I'm signing off. And once again, Ameek, thank you very much.
Thank you, Alan. Take care.